Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to episode 6 of season 2 of the U.S. History GCast as presented by Gibsonian Institute. Today we are looking at U.S. and Cuban relations. There's two specific incidents we're going to go over. So we've got two political cartoons. The first on the right represents the Bay of Pigs invasion exploding in JFK's face. And then on the top left, we've got JFK arm wrestling with Nikita Khrushchev, in which will be known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. So let's get into our objectives and get squared away. First, we're going to explore Cuba before the revolution. There's things that are going to cause the revolution to happen because of the way Cuba was beforehand. And then we'll look at the revolution briefly and then get started with more of where the United States comes into play. We're going to examine the Bay of Pigs invasion. And then we're going to analyze the Cuban Missile Crisis. And then lastly, what we're going to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis, we're going to conclude how it was resolved by looking at a couple of documents, really short, real brief ones, just paragraphs, but they do have a lot of good stuff, and sometimes it contradicts, so we're going to find a way to find the truth from within. All right, so let's get started. First, we're going to be looking at Cuba before the revolution, 1949. Remember, Cuba had been an American territory at the turn of the century, 1900s, because of the Spanish-American War, and Cuba is going to be given a protectorate state for a while. But in 1949, Cuba is going to adopt a democratic constitution with a couple of amendments put in, the Platt Amendment notably, but we won't get into that too much detail with that. But what you should know is that in 1949, Cuba is a democratic nation that is on good terms with the United States. The president at the time is Fulgencio Batista. He serves his 8 years, 1940 to 1948. During this time, 90% of Cuban land is owned by foreigners, specifically U.S. investors. So we have a really good relationship that really benefits the United States, but it won't be too great for Cubans. Only 10% of the land is owned by Cubans. So Cuba essentially was Las Vegas today. So Cuba back then, there was nightlife, casinos, prostitution. It was known as America's playground. All right, so just looking at this, it looks almost like it's supposed to almost look similar to like the main strip at Las Vegas. It was called America's playground because, and I'm going to mention this a lot, it's very close to the United States, 90 miles off the coast of Miami. You could just take a boat, be there in a couple hours, have a blast, come back home. And it was almost like a weekend type of trip. So the United States enjoys this really good relationship that really skews towards the United States. Not great for Cubans, though. Continuing before the revolution happens, in 1952, Batista unsuccessfully runs for president again, and in a bad move for democracy's sake. He stages a coup meaning he tries to take over with military force. He does so, outlaws the Communist Party. In the Communist Party, we've talked why do revolutions happen, right? Specifically, we looked at the Germans, right? Why did they vote Hitler into office? Well, because the nation was struggling. 1/3 of the nation lived in poverty at this time, so there's a massive wealth disparity. People are kind of sick of Batista, and he's taken over with military force. Not going to end well for him. All right, here's Batista here. All right, solid slick back hair there. So he stages the coup, and the Cuban Revolution forms. All right, we've got two sides here. The gentleman on the left with the berets, the one on the far left is someone you may have seen on a lot of T-shirts. His name is Che Guevara, and the person next to him is the notorious Fidel Castro versus Batista right there. Almost called him Generalissimo because he's dressed like a military leader. And again, another thing we talked about in the past, anytime someone's dressed as a military leader, probably not a good sign for freedoms in that country. If you think Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini in World War II. Usually not a great deal. However, Fidel Castro is going to lead communist attacks against Batista. Che Guevara is going to come to Cuba and he's going to support Castro. Che Guevara at this time is basically he's like a mercenary, but for revolutions. He's going to come around, hey, I can support your revolution. And he's going to do this all throughout Latin America. He's actually Argentinian. So for him to get to pop up in Cuba. That's a little bit of ground to cover. So yeah, he's going to be kind of like a revolutionary traveler, if you will. And from here on, we're going to see guerrilla warfare. However, the United States is going to back Batista because 90% of the land is owned by United States citizens. So we have a vested interest in this. Fighting's going to continue for 2 years, but however, in 1959, Castro will win. Castro wins, kicks people out, get out of this country, takes away all the land, redistributes it to people of Cuba. If you're Cuban, this guy's pretty cool, right? He just got rid of everyone, got rid of the guy that illegally took power, and gave us land. I mean, what's bad to say about him at this point? However, relationships between the U.S. and Cuba are going to become very tense at this time, obviously, because they're very near neighbors, 90 miles away again. All right. So now Castro, of course, led the Communist Party. Cuba's become communist, and there's a communist nation 90 miles from our borders. People start to get tense. All right. And on top of this, the Soviet Union provides aid to Cuba. I want to pause for a minute here. Everyone has been acting in the stated goals that they had. The Soviet Union says that they're going to support communism as it pops up around the world. Here they are supporting communism as it pops up in Cuba. The United States says that they're going to try to stop the spread of communism as it pops up. Batista fights against the communists. The U.S. supports it. So both sides are kind of doing what they said they're going to do, but it's obviously they don't coalesce. They don't combine peacefully. So this is going to start to make tensions rise, not only between the United States and Cuba, but also the Soviet Union and the United States. All right, so we're going to take a look at that as that keeps progressing. There's the victorious Castro. Now we're going to move forward to the Bay of Pigs invasion. This is shortly after Castro becomes the leader of Cuba. The CIA and President Eisenhower at the time planned a secret invasion of Cuba using Cuban exiles that were going to be trained by the CIA operatives and given U.S. military support to overthrow Castro. They figure, let's get him out of here before he gets even more loved by the Cubans and put someone that we like in power. Eisenhower's term for president, his second term, ends, however, before they are able to carry out the mission. So here's Castro again. Here's where the Bay of Pigs is, right there, right? So it's a planned invasion of Cuba, and they're going to try to cut off to Havana. And if they have control of Havana, hopefully they can make the rest of the nation kind of bend to the will. So Bay of Pigs. JFK is the president elected after Eisenhower, and 9 days after taking office, he gives it the okay. The military leaders and advisors come to him and say, hey, we've got this thing planned out. It's ready to go. It's going to work. And he says, all right. JFK is not known for his foreign policy. A lot of people were a little bit afraid to vote for JFK because he had a good track record in the Senate as domestic policy for getting things done for America on American soil, but foreign policy and how he interacts with nations around the world, he's unproven, and we're in the middle of the Cold War, so people were uneasy about this. All right, so JFK knows he has a little bit of limitations in foreign policy, and he takes the advice of his advisors. All right, specifically the military leaders here, and it is a disaster. It's catastrophic. It's brutal. The U.S. decides not to provide military support. They're a little afraid. JFK is afraid that if we completely invade Cuba, all of a sudden the Soviets are going to want a war, which is probably a fair assumption. And it's going to go disastrously. The exiles that come back to Cuba that were trained under the CIA completely get rounded up, sent to prisons. All right, so it's a giant farce. That's why the cartoon that we looked at the beginning showed the cigar blowing up in his face. This whole idea blows up in JFK's face, and there's ramifications for this. Foreign policy after the Bay of Pigs, the United States and Kennedy are going to be embarrassed by this. They look weak to the rest of the world. Can you even take care of a little tiny nation right near you? What are you going to do if the Soviets want to invade? So the U.S. is going to place an embargo on Cuba, trade embargo. This trade embargo had been put in place all the way until, I believe, the last year or two of President Obama being in office. I want to say 2010 2014 maybe is when it may have been lifted. However, restrictions were loosened, but under President Trump, they've been tightened up a little bit more. So we still kind of don't have this great relationship with Cuba, even though they're our next door neighbors. Another thing, however, is that JFK no longer trusts these foreign policy advisors. 9 days in office, and he looks like a fool, not listening to them anymore. He's going to have a real small circle, and he's going to make decisions on his own. And the small group of confidants, including his brother Robert Kennedy, who's going to be the Attorney General at this time. All right, so no longer is he going to be taking advice from people that he doesn't know, that he expects to be experts, and then have this catastrophe happen. So this is going to come into play with the next event that's going to take place. But for now, we are at our halftime. So going to Google Classroom, there's an assessment for this first half. Second half, we're going to get back and get started with on the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis has its own separate work that's going to be done. So go ahead and get those assessments done. Come on back. I'll wait for you. All right, welcome back. We're moving on now with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's get into some of these details. So on October 1962, U.S. surveillance spy planes are going to detect Soviet missiles in Cuba. And let me pull up the laser pointer here. As you can see here, missile-ready tents, missile launch positions, right? So all these things, it's undeniable. These look like they're up to something. All right, there's other pictures that I'll be able to find later that show like the sites. All right, so things are getting tense now. JFK is going to seek advice from his advisors before making his own decision. He's going to make his own decision and believe himself and believe in what he personally believes, obviously, especially because of what happened with the Bay of Pigs invasion. But he is still going to look for advice. He needs more opinion on this. So he's going to go see two groups of people. People that are known as the Doves, and people that are known as Hawks. And yes, I know that this is a peregrine falcon. But this is the best image I could find of an up-close facing another bird. All right, so please, and anyways, we're falcons anyway, so this should work even better. He gets advice from both of them. The Hawks are going to be people in favor of war. Doves are going to be people that want to seek peace. So he's going to be listening to both of these sides. We need to go in there. We need to just take apart these silos ourselves. That's what the people that are going to be Hawks that are in favor of. People that are Doves are saying, yes, we got to take care of this, but we cannot start World War III. So he's in a little bit of a sticky situation here. So his decision is to order a naval blockade of Cuba, and it's a massive blockade. It's not just a couple boats here. It's big. All right. At the same time, the Soviets believe that this is an act of war, and they are going to be sending a shipment of nuclear missiles to Cuba at this time as well. So in the 1960s, we have the Soviets shipping nuclear missiles to Cuba on our back door. All right. And this is our response in the moment. We put this blockade in place. The ships keep coming towards Cuba. So we're heading, we're speeding towards quite the standoff here. USSR is going to be put in the position here. They're the ones that have to make the decision. Is the Soviet Union going to continue coming towards us and cause conflict, or are they going to turn around, or what's going to happen here? So diplomacy ensues. Thankfully, diplomacy meaning they're going to talk it out. All right. So let's see what we get. This is going to be the deal that ends the crisis. What I'm going to have you do is, after looking at what the deal is, we're going to look at the details of the deal and see what textbooks say versus what the actual documents say. Now, we cut quick to this, but normally what I would show at this point is a video that really shows how heated the tensions got at this point. This is probably the hottest the Cold War gets between the Soviet Union and the United States getting into a direct conflict. All right, very close, very close. We were close to duking it out. We were able to make a deal. All right, so I can't show that enough in just a few slides, but just know. All right, so first, the Soviets are going to remove their missiles from Cuba. Good idea, good stuff. We like that. The U.S. will promise not to invade Cuba. No more Bay of Pigs and all that shenanigans. And then lastly, and this is the thing that doesn't get talked about often, is that the United States is going to remove missiles from Turkey, which is literal next-door neighbors of Soviet Union. But we're going to do this 6 months later, which is interesting. Why would we do this way later? I'd be interested to hear maybe put some suggestions of why in the comments that we would wait 6 months after the Soviets do what we're asking for them to do in Cuba. Why would we have to wait half a year to do what we want them to do, what they want us to do in Turkey? So I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. Why are we getting a different timeline? But other than that, that wraps up what we got today. All right, so make sure you head over to Google Classroom for the second post about this. There's going to be what really ends, what's the deal that ends the Cold War. So make sure you check that out. It's going to be a brief assignment. So we'll get that done and we'll get that squared away. If you have any questions, make sure you email me directly. Other than that, I hope you have a good day and enjoy the rest of your day.